Hello viewers, I am Dr. Sanavar Soham from Kalindi College, Botany Department, Delhi University, and I had been taking up ecology and utilization of plants series, and I was introducing you to ecology. So let's move on to the concept of population. A population, as I discussed already, is a group of individuals of the same species present within a specific area at a particular time. It can also be defined as a group of similar individuals of the same species capable of interbreeding among themselves. The growth, survival, and movement spread of population are regulated by various factors. Now, changes in the physical factors significantly alter the size of the population and affect the interaction between various populations. Now, populations of the same species that can interbreed are referred to as metapopulations. The characteristic of population are represented by many attributes, but the main ones are numerical attributes and structural attributes. Now, let's begin with numerical attributes. These include parameters such as natality, which is birth rate, mortality, which is death rate, and the density of a population. So let's understand what is density. It is the number of individuals of a population present per unit area, and natality or the birth rate is the rate at which the numbers of individuals are added to a population, of course due to births, over the specified time. And what is mortality? It is the rate at which the individuals are lost from a population by death. The dispersal of a population is the rate at which individuals move or migrate from an area. Distribution is the total area of occurrence of a population, how well it is distributed in the area. So, the total area of occurrence tells us about the distribution of a population. Now, what is the abundance of a population? It is the number of individuals within a particular population. So, in one population, how many individuals are present? That tells about the abundance. Now, moving on to the structural attributes. These includes parameters such as age, distribution, dispersion, etc. Now, population growth, if we need to know, within a population, the individuals we know are born and they die. If there are more individuals being born than dying, then obviously the population will grow in size. While if more individuals are dying than being born, the population shrinks. The movement of individuals also affect the size of a population. The individuals enter or leave a population. This is referred to immigration and emigration. So, whenever there is entry of individuals, the population size will increase, and whenever there is emigration or exit of individual from a population, then the size of a population will shrink. The population size changes with time. So, the growth rate of population is calculated by the given equation. Delta n upon delta t is equal to Rn, where R is the intrinsic rate of natural increase in the population. It is the difference between birth and death rate of a population. So, we calculate the natality and mortality, we subtract it, and that basically forms the intrinsic rate of natural increase in population. N in this formula, N is basically the size of the population. The change in the size of the population is noted at a particular time, and that time in this formula is T. You can see here. So, the changes in population are explained by exponential growth model. So, this is a diagrammatic representation of an exponential growth of a population. When the resources are unlimited, the populations exhibit exponential growth. That is, you can see the population is plotted on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, and this graph shows that the population with time is increasing exponentially because the resources are unlimited and there are no limiting factors in the population. This results in a J-shaped curve. This exponential basically growth shows the any population with such growth shows a J-shaped curve. This means that the size of a population goes on increasing and after some times becomes constant. Maximum size of a population that environment can sustain or support at a particular time is known as its carrying capacity, because obviously there is a limit to all the factors present in environment. So not all the time each and every population will have unlimited resources. So according to the factors, the limiting factors present in the environment, the maximum size of a population that environment can sustain or support tells us about the carrying capacity. The growth rate of population slows down when it reaches the carrying capacity. That means the resources are now limited and the populations exhibit logistic growth. So this diagram shows, or it is a diagrammatic representation of logistic growth. In logistic growth, the population growth decreases as the resources gets limited. So as the population is utilizing the resource, say water, air or soil for that matter, or any other particular resource which a population requires for its growth and development, if it becomes, any one of it becomes limited, then it levels off at carrying capacity. You can see here the K or the carrying capacity is shown here with a straight line. This shows that beyond this there will be competition and the environment will not be able to sustain anymore. So the organisms will start showing S-shaped curve. This results in a S-shaped curve and the population then becomes constant, the growth becomes constant, and this S shape shows the logistic growth. That means limited by the resources and it levels off at carrying capacity of the environment. The rate of change of population growth and distribution of individuals is referred to as the study of dynamics. Biological and non-biological factors influence the population size. The biological factors include various types of interactions within the species. Which are these? The environmental variables like temperature, precipitation, salinity and pH also play important role in regulating the population size. So moving on to community, that is where various populations dwell with each other. Now till now we understood the population, the increase decrease of population. Now we'll discuss about the populations, various populations or different populations when they come together and start interacting and form a community. So let's move to community. When several populations share a common habitat and resources and interact among themselves, they develop into a community, biosynosis. Community is therefore an assemblage of populations of two or more species occupying the same geographical area at a particular time. Each community exhibits a number of characteristics such as diversity, density, dominance, composition and stratification. The transitional zone between two or more communities is called ecotone. So ecotone is that zone, transitional zone, where the representatives of both the populations are present. So it is the richest of all the zones in a community. Community ecology or synecology includes the study of interactions between species in the communities on spatial and temporal scales. The parameters such as distribution, structure, abundance, demography and interaction between populations are considered in community ecology. The properties such as species richness, productivity, and succession are also studied. The diversity is also related to stability of a community. The more stable the community is, the more diverse it will be. The communities with high species diversity are more stable. This is because many alternate pathways are available to enable the individuals to obtain energy and nutrients in an area with high specific diversity. If one of the species disappears, its function can be taken over by the other relatively close species. So we have advantage over here that even if one species is disappearing, the alternate species in the community might help in making it dwell or adapt to the crisis. Now, if we talk of dependence in a community, there are some species which depend upon the dominant species for their survival. For that, we shall very well understand what a dominant species is and the concept of keystone species. For example, lower plants such as bryophytes or thallophytes are dependent on the shade and moisture conditions provided by the dominant species present in the area. In a community, processes such as energy flow, material cycling take place. Energy flows via feeding relationships. So the energy gets transferred through different biotic components in a chain-like manner referred to as food chain. I will be discussing all these aspects of community ecology in my upcoming lectures. Now, food chains, briefly I will tell you, they form a food web. Many food chains collectively form a food web. Solar energy absorbed by the producers is transferred to food, and then it is transferred to the consumers which feed upon that food. So the functioning of an organism in an ecosystem is thus referred to as ecological niche. The community dynamics change with time. The dynamic nature is reflected in succession of organisms in a habitat. A series of changes result in the development of relatively stable community which maintains its structure in a particular area. Such a stable and mature community is called a climax community. It is a final community which has established itself and adapted itself and become mature and now defines the community of an area. Communities at various stages of successions are called serial communities. Now, different stages, each stage is a serial community. The community changes are gradual. The communities reach equilibrium and maintain a dynamic balance with environmental changes in the course of time. The process of change in the communities and the environment at a place in the course of time is called ecological succession. Now, let's discuss the foundation and keystone species that define an ecosystem. Now, if we talk of some species have strong impact on the community structure and they play a vital role in maintaining the balance of a community. Now, these species include foundation and the keystone species. A foundation species plays a unique and essential role in community as it supports the other organism. Kelps, I'm now giving you an example of brown algae, the kelps. They are foundation species that form the basis of kelp forest in the sea at the coast of California. They create environments for survival of other organisms that make the forest community. The corals of a coral reef are another foundation species. How? The exoskeletons of living and dead corals make up the coral reef, the reef structure, which protects other species from waves and ocean currents. So, a species that has vast effect on community structure relative to their biomass or abundance is referred to as keystone species. So, it is not that the largest of the plant or the biggest of the plants form the keystone species. Basically, a keystone species is that species which basically belongs to higher trophic levels and which, even if smaller or larger in size, independent of biomass, tends to modify or impact the environment. So, a sharp reduction in diversity or collapse structure commonly occurs when this species is removed from the community. That is why it is known as keystone species. I will give an example. In boreal and temperate forest, in high severity natural fires that occur in the canopy, keystone species, that is conifers, fail to regenerate successfully, mainly due to limitation of favorable seedbed. So, what I am talking is that in boreal and temperate forest, generally the keystone species are the conifers. Now, due to the forest fires or the natural fires in high severity, the basically community or the whole area gets wiped out. The populations dwelling there, they gets wiped out. So now when everything has been burned, the conifers fail to regenerate successfully, mainly due to the limitation of favorable seedbed. They require a favorable seedbed, that is the soil structure, to dwell back again in that area. On the other hand, the understory ericaceous plants regenerate vigorously by vegetative methods and form the below ground components that survive the fire. So, what happens here now? That earlier, before fire, the conifers were the keystone species, but after fire, the ericaceous plants, because they can regenerate through vegetative propagation, and they basically whatever below underground parts which have survived the fire, they start vegetatively growing in that area in the boreal temperate forest. And now what happens is these becomes the keystone species. Thus, in the absence of successful conifer regeneration, the vigorously growing understory ericaceous plants become the new keystone species. The new keystone ericaceous species bring about a significant long-term habitat change by rapid accumulation of polyphenol-rich humus. So, obviously, with the change in the keystone species, the change happens in the soil and its composition as well. So, obviously, then the keystone species will define or has basically impacted the environment of that area. Now, moving on to the interaction in a community. Now, we all know that in community, when we are living, the living organisms show different types of interactions which can be harmful or beneficial to the organisms and to each other. So, these interactions are essential for survival, growth, reproduction and continuance of the species. Species interact in different ways in a community. We'll find some beautiful examples here. Interactions can be intraspecific, first of all, that is, intra means basically between the same, within. So, between the same species, or interspecific, or between different species, that is interspecific, right? So, the interaction can be either intra or interspecific. Intraspecific interactions include colonization, aggregation, while neutralism, competition, predator relationships are interspecific between various species of different populations. So, the types of interactions reported in a community include competition, predation, parasitism, mutualism, commensalism, etc. We will be discussing briefly all of this today, and then later on, when I take this chapter in detail, I will discuss each and every aspect of the interaction, positive and negative interactions in a community. So, species present, when we talk of competition, the species present within a community compete with each other for resources. Now, this is considered to be an important limiting factor of the growth of population. The competition can be of two types, as I told you: interspecific, if the competition occurs between the individuals of different species, or intraspecific if it occurs between the individuals of the same species. Now, what is predation? Predation again is a negative interaction. It is the killing of an individual of another species for food. So, the predator species that is an animal that kills and eats the other animal, we call it predator species, kills or harms the prey species. What is the prey species? The animal which is killed and is being eaten by other animals is the prey. So some predators kill their prey before eating them, while some others act as parasites and feed on them on prey when alive. So predation is a negative interaction in which one is benefited but the other partner is harmed. For example, feeding of herbivores on plants, that is grazing cow. Now predation affects the population of a size of predators and prey. Moving on to the next type of interaction, which is mutualism, in which both the species get benefited. Now example of such association is symbiosis. Now symbiosis is a close, prolonged association between two or more different organisms of different species that benefit each other, right? So symbiosis is because it is helping both the organism, it is helping and benefiting each one of them, so it is a positive type of interaction. Now let's move on to example. Rhizobium bacteria, you've heard of, it grows on the root nodules of the leguminous plants, right? And the leguminous plants also are helped by the rhizobium bacteria because it helps in nitrogen fixation. So this is a beautiful example of mutualism or symbiosis. Now insects pollinating the flowers of an angiosperm is another example of mutualism, where the insects get the nectar, they get the food, and in turn they help in the pollination of flowers and their perpetuation. Now moving on to the next type of interaction, which is commensalism. Now this is a type of relationship among organisms in which one organism benefits while the other organism is neither benefited nor harmed. So this is another category of interactions. As in for now, we discussed where both the partners were benefited, and then we discussed where one was benefited and other was harmed. Now this is the third type, where in which one organism is benefited whereas the other is neither benefited nor harmed. So we say it's a neutral interaction for the other one. It is neutral. Why? Because even if it is not getting benefited, it doesn't get harmed as well. So this organism that benefited is called commensal, while the other organism that is neither benefited nor harmed is called as host. For example, in epiphytes, the trees support the plants such as orchids, which get benefited, but the trees are not harmed. So the interaction between the trees and the orchids on which it dwells is an example of commensalism. Now what is opposite of commensalism? It is amensalism, and an interspecific relationship in which product of one organism has a negative effect on the other organism. So example of such is parasitism. Now parasitism is an interaction in which one species lives either inside or on the body of the other species, which is serving itself as a host, and that the plant which is dwelling depends upon it for the food requirements. So the organism which is dependent on food on the host plant is called as parasite. The example is cuscuta. The plant cuscuta absorbs nutrients from the host plants. There are many series of range of plants, higher plants that support cuscuta. So cuscuta absorbs nutrients from the host plants through the specialized structure called hostoria. These are peg-like ingrowths which cuscuta forms and makes a connection in the xylem and then starts absorbing the nutrients from the host plants. So this is a beautiful example of parasitism. Now moving on to the abiotic factors. As I already told you, that there are two important components, the biotic and the abiotic components, which define an ecosystem or which compose an ecosystem. So I now will be starting up with abiotic factor, soil, as we know that they form an important component of an ecosystem and affect the survival of an individual. So population or community to greater extent. So In the upcoming lecture, I will be discussing about the abiotic factor soil, but just briefly I will tell you what soil is. Soil forms the outer layer of the earth crust, as we all know. The word soil is derived from the word solum, which means earthy material that supports plant growth. Now, soil acts as a substrate that provides mechanical support to plants and as a reservoir of water and nutrients for the plants. It is composed of inorganic and organic materials. Now, what are the inorganic components? They include mineral elements derived from parent rock material, and the organic matter comprised of organic wastes, dead remains of plants, animals, and the decomposition products. So, large number of algae and microorganisms such as bacteria, virus, fungi also form important component of soil. So, in the next lecture, I will be discussing what soil is and different components of it, the profile of soil and what it is composed of, and how the soil is formed. I hope you have enjoyed the lecture. Thank you very much.